We're live. Welcome to Amanda Toast, where we drink and talk about things. Join us as we discuss our favorite sci-fi and fantasy shows. You're listening to Season 1, The Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, Deconstructed, Episode 2.
Amanda Toast is a podcast where two best friends get together to toast the things we love in sci-fi and fantasy television. This season explores the world of Thra in the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, one episode at a time. Today's podcast is all about the second episode of Age of Resistance, titled Nothing is Simple Anymore. This is the episode that sees our heroes respond to their calls to adventure as the forces of evil that oppose them begin to exercise their power.
So this podcast is based on the TV series produced by Netflix with some references to the original 1982 film, The Dark Crystal. We have not read the books that supplement the world of The Dark Crystal, so we don't speak to them, although we do point to them periodically and recognize them as an influence on the show. So we're about to begin. Please note that this is your official spoiler notice. If you haven't seen the series yet, you are going to find out what happens in detail.
Great, so let's jump on in with a synopsis of episode 2. At Algra's orrery, a confused Algra wakes from a years-long self-induced coma to the pain of the Crystal of Truth. After failing to find the reason for the crystal's anguish in her scrolls, she leaves to visit the Skeksis for answers. On the bright surface world, Deet marvels at the alien life she encounters. She meets a new podling friend, Brave Hup, who saves her from an angry spitter. Together they set out for Harar. At the Castle of the Crystal, the Skeksis gaslight Rian and demand the scientist make more essence. Rian convinces Gershon the Skeksis killed Mira, and together they rescue her essence from the scientist's laboratory. Rian dramatically escapes, but at the expense of Gershon's freedom. Chamberlain blames the scientist for Rian's escape and the loss of the last essence, and he is ritually punished. Rian's father, Ordon, is entrusted by the Skeksis to track down his son. In Harar, Brea visits the Sifa for answers about the strange Simple. She outwits the Sifa elder but causes a diplomatic incident which leads to her royal punishment.
I feel like that's such an understatement, a diplomatic incident.
Oh.
But we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to that. So these are all the main plot movements that we're going to be exploring today. We're going to be talking about the main themes. The episode we mentioned earlier is titled Nothing is Simple Anymore. This is a really important line. This line is Jen, the main character of the Dark Crystal movie, 1982. This is the point at which Jen rejects his call to adventure. So Jen has a shard of the Dark Crystal in the movie. He throws that shard away. He doesn't want to be on this quest. He doesn't want to be the sole savior of the Gelfling, but this quest has been thrust upon him, and he rejects it. And he says nothing is simple anymore. So this episode, today's episode, is all about the refusal of the call to adventure in the hero's journey and the various forms of symbolism in different characters that we find along the way. Mm-hmm. And we're going to start with Ogra and the Orrery.
That's right. So this is the first episode in which we meet Algra, her little podling helper, and we see a great panning shot of her orrery inside. So an orrery is basically just a moving model of a solar system. Algra uses it to plan the rotation and the timing of all the celestial bodies in the sky. Now, I wanted to ask you, Amanda, when you first see Algra, do you remember your first impressions of Algra from the original movie?
Yeah, in the original movie, she was scary.
Yeah?
To me. I mean, part of it was I was pretty young when I watched it, but, she was this crazy lady, this crazy hermit, out in the middle of nowhere, with all this weird science stuff that doesn't make sense to Jen or to the kids. You don't really understand its importance or why it works, and she's, kind of yelling all the time.
Mm-hmm.
She's still that person in the show, but she's also so much more.
That's right. I was really happy that Algra is really fleshed out in this season. She gets a lot of screen time. We journey with her on her own archetype, which is the sage, prophet on a rebirth archetype. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so in the hero's journey, there are 8 common different character archetypes, and we do find most of them in the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. The role of the sage or the prophet is really important. Their general job is to act as a source of knowledge and wisdom and momentum in the story. So their primary purpose is to give the main character, to give the heroes the information that they need to complete the quest. Sometimes it might be handing them an important item like a medallion or a tome, or it might be imparting of key information that the character needs in order to complete the quest that's set before them. But the sage, we see numerous types of sages in different kinds of media. Obi-Wan Kenobi is a classic sage character for one in Star Wars. You know, he fills that mentor-like role for Luke. And in the Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, we see Ogra, this divine figure, acting as that mentor and sage and spiritual guidance for the Gelfling.
Yeah, and another great example is also Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. He and
Oh yeah,
Olga have
totally.
a lot in common. But if we go back even further and we look at possibly the inspiration for Gandalf and Obi-Wan Kenobi, there's a mythical figure in ancient Norse pre-Christian mythology that Olga has a lot in common with. And I think it'd be really cool to talk about Odin One-Eye. And I think that Algra, I think the writers have written Algra to be a Thra world allegory for Odin One-Eye. So
Interesting.
one of Algra's key features is she's missing an eye. And not in this episode, but in the next episode, we see that she has a third eye open on her forehead. So Odin One-Eye, in his mythological adventures, he was the type of person that would give anything. He would sacrifice anything for knowledge, the secrets of the universe, forbidden knowledge.
Ooh.
And Odin, he goes to the Well of Mimir, which is the well that the Yggdrasil, the tree of the cosmos, comes out of. And
Ooh.
he's met by Mimir, who won't let him drink from the well. The well is the source of cosmic knowledge. And Odin is... Mimir won't let him drink from it until he gives him an eye. And what Odin does is he cuts out one of his eyes, he gives it to Mimir. Mimir then lets him drink from the waters of the well. And the symbolism here, the main story is that you have to sacrifice something for the wisdom, or great wisdom comes with sacrifice. And
Ooh, wow.
what it's thought Odin gained was a sacred perception informed by divine ancestral wisdom. So the what we could parallel with Algra here is that right now her third eye isn't open, but she's going to have to figure out how to open it so that she can commune again with the crystal of truth and get back her ancestral wisdom. Algra is an immortal divine figure, and without her connection to Thra, she's broken.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Right. So there's more than that. It's really interesting. Odin, he was willing to hang himself on a tree and hover between the realm of life and death, almost to the point of dying, in order to gain the knowledge of the runes. And I don't mean to talk about the next episode too much, but it's important to parallel these two figures. Algra sits at the roots of the sanctuary tree until she learns the knowledge of how to commune with the crystal again. So there's another similarity between hanging out with the world tree to gain knowledge.
Totally.
Now, but there is a main difference here. Odin would sacrifice anything for forbidden knowledge. Now, Algra did sacrifice her keeping of the crystal of truth to get the orrery so that she could send her consciousness out to learn the wisdom of the stars.
That's right.
Yeah, but an important thing to point out is that Aughra would not sacrifice a gelfling for forbidden knowledge. And we actually see her sacrifice herself to save the gelfling.
That's right. And I think, actually, if I can just interject for a moment here,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big part of why I think we talk about Aughra being on a journey of her own
Mm-hmm.
as a sage and prophet figure, as this sort of divine personification of Mother Nature, in a way, going on a journey of her own rebirth to fix herself. And so, yeah, when we go into those later episodes and we start exploring those key scenes that you've pointed to, right, those sacrifice scenes and the tree of life scenes, we'll definitely be pointing those out when we talk about Aughra's journey
Mm-hmm.
as an Odin one-eye figure.
Yeah. Uh, so there's also, talking about the third eye for just a second here. The third eye is sacred perception informed by divine ancestral wisdom. It's basically a third way of perceiving yourself and how you fit cosmically in the universe. Um, and that there is a sacrifice to give for that knowledge. When we go back to episode 1, the collector tells Brea, look at this face. This face used to be beautiful, but then knowledge. So that is, I think, a direct reference to sacrificing something for forbidden knowledge. But I think what the collector is alluding to is that the Skeksis are aware they sacrifice their youth for immortality. They did this thing to the crystal to absorb its energy, but that doesn't give them youth and vitality for eternity. They're aging. Every day they're getting older and older until they crumble into dust and finally die. Whereas, and the fact that I think the collector and the other Skeksis are aware of this, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, the way that they try to impart that knowledge or that experience down. But the Skeksis' experience with sacrifice and the price that they pay, it's interesting because the Skeksis pay a price unwillingly and unintentionally, and they're constantly trying to figure out how to get out of paying that price.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Aughra does it willingly, and the difference in terms of outcome is really important.
That's right. Now, we don't get Aughra's backstory, but I'm wondering if she had to give her eye in order to achieve the third eye opening a long time ago, and that was when she was bonded to the crystal.
So your theory is that she was once a mortal creature, like maybe a gelfling or something else a long, long time ago, and that her sacrifice of her eye is what put her into a divine state.
Maybe.
I like it. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And when so Aughra is our sage and prophet character. Would you say there is something really important how she descends down from her orrery?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking that. That's a scene that I really, really like. So we've got this great opening for this episode where Aughra's asleep. The orrery is rotating as it's always done. There's a podling there, and actually, I'm just remembering this podling. It starts with him getting dressed, doing his hair, having his breakfast, looking at himself in the mirror, giving himself a little kiss because he's still good looking even at his old age. And you get the impression as the viewer that he's been doing this for a long time. Like, he is very much a diligent, dutiful guy, but he's been doing this for a long time. And then we get that confirmation when all of a sudden Aughra, who's laying on this slab of stone, wakes up and she literally coughs dust. She's been out that long. And she gets up and she's spazzing out about the crystal and things being in pain. And she actually says to the podling, like, oh my gosh, you were just a kid the last time I saw you. You're so old. And the podling says, well, actually, that was my grandfather. And then it really sort of strikes her how long she's been out.
That's right.
Right?
She asks him, how long have I been gone? And I think what he says is 80 or 90 trine. Now, but then later when she does meet up with the Skeksis, they say they haven't seen her in hundreds of trine. So it's possible they or the Gelfling haven't seen her in hundreds of trine, but to this podling and his family, she's specifically been away for 80 to 90. That's a long time.
Years, something like that. Yeah. We were chatting about this earlier, and we kind of joked about how this podling is sort of everybody's experience of being in quarantine right now, where the days are just sort of blurring together without any real change.
Yes, we can all relate to him right now.
But yeah, so Ogre waking up, just to get back to your question, actually, I've got a clip that I'm just going to play here about Ogre's relationship to the crystal and the planet.
Get help? I am help! Oh, this pain, this awakening, can only mean some calamities befallen Thra while I was away. Ogre must find out what has happened and set things right, if I'm not already too late.
Right, so her moment of waking is specifically because we have this moment where there's no turning back, right? The darkening has happened. It's no longer within the control of the planet. Entities like the sanctuary tree are seeking living, active beings of action to take intervention now. They can't hold it back any longer. And then we have this moment where the planet is in so much pain that Ogre, who is in basically a self-induced coma or deep meditative state, is brought back from who knows how far into the universe she was astral traveling, is brought back because of that pain. And then she makes this decision. So she goes and reviews those scrolls, right? She goes and looks at all these scrolls of divination and prophecy, all the knowledge of the universe, and it cannot explain why Thra is in pain. It's a new and unprecedented threat. It's an alien threat. And so she has to go out in the world to find out. So there's this literal sense of the gods returning to Earth after a millennia of being away.
That's right. And the gods returning to Earth, does that happen in other stories?
I mean, tons. I mean, we could go back to like early fantasy novels, right? Martin, Game of Thrones, the red god, and there's lots. Are there any that you're thinking of specifically?
Well, I keep going back to Lord of the Rings, and it's the moment where Gandalf enters the Shire. I don't know where he's been all this time, but he's like divine being that enters the Shire to give a quest. So there's a parallel there.
Totally, yeah. But it's a really significant and symbolic moment because it means that we've seen the Skeksis start to move. We've seen the forces of evil start to consolidate and exercise their power to maintain their power. And now we've seen the force of the planet itself starting to employ its own devices, right? And so Ogre is sort of the living embodiment of that change. And I love that there's this part before she goes where she actually talks about what she should do. And she's wondering if she should go to the Mystics. The Mystics are the Skeksis' counterpart. And she rejects the idea. She says there's no time for riddles. And I think it's a really interesting question that we keep coming back to. Why, if the Mystics are so good, if the Mystics are so benevolent, have they allowed the darkening to happen?
Yeah.
And her answer is there's no time for riddles. And I think there's a certain idea here that the Skeksis and the Mystics, while both being extreme versions of good and evil, are still at the same time their worst versions of themselves. The Mystics are almost immobilized into inaction because of their benevolence. It's almost like the Buddhist idea of detachment, right? If you have no worldly attachments, then you do not interfere with the goings on of the world.
That's a very great analogy to make, and I would love to put a pin in that and come back and talk about it at the last episode that we do for the season.
All right, that
Yeah.
sounds like a plan. But yeah, so Ogra, our Odin One Eye figure, she's so many things. She's Odin One Eye. She's Mother Nature. She's like, do you see other types of symbols in her?
Well,
She's Gandalf.
I would like to talk about how she's very, very grandmotherly, and I think that relates to her being Mother Earth. She's called Mother Algra by the Gelfling. Like, she's literally walking Mother Earth. And I think that is beautifully represented in her character design, where she's very ancient, she's very old, but Earth is like, I know it's not Earth, it's Thra, but Thra would be ancient and very old. And there's this stereotypical like nubile young woman that's often used as a mother nature allegory in a lot of fantasy, but I think Algra is a much more truthful representation of what Mother Earth would look like. She's also has some bestial parts to her design, like she has horns. One of her fingers is a claw.
Yeah.
But she's very busty, so she's very just very motherly and grandmotherly. Now,
Yeah, fertile, right?
yeah, fertile, or once was fertile. So she inhabits the Maiden, Mother, and Crone Trinity all at the same time.
Beautiful. I'm so glad you said that, because
Yeah.
again, that fits into our idea of threes, right?
And she's also, the Skeksis call her Crone, Hag. They call her all the names an early ignoramus would call an old woman. She's also called a witch. So she's like a, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but
I think I know. I think what you're trying to say is she's almost like a vessel for every like Madonna horror complex you can think of to call a woman.
yeah, there we go. And I love that on even on her costume, on the back of her costume, we have the symbol that Brea's desperately trying to figure out. She has the Aureole imprinted onto her costume itself. And I feel like if Brea had just met Algra first, she
Things
would
have
have
been so different.
Yeah, the story would have been much different, because she could have gone to Algra, and Algra could have told her everything she needed. But then we wouldn't have had the cool conflict with her family and the librarian. So that's
Totally. Which actually feeds into our next talking point, which is about the hero's journey. So each of our heroes has experienced a call to adventure. We talked about that last episode. They've had a call of adventure through a herald. A herald is a type of character that appears near the beginning of a story to announce the need for change. It's the catalyst that sets the whole adventure into motion. In episode 1, we talked about Rion's herald being the spitter that escapes and drives him to go and try and prove himself. Deet's herald is obviously the sanctuary tree that provides her a vision, and then Brea's herald is the library book responding to her demands for the truth. So all three of our heroes were called to adventure. In this episode, they need to decide what to do about it. And so we see that play out in their different story arcs and within their different character types.
Mm-hmm. We also see each one of them gain an ally, don't we?
That's right. So in the story, Rion gains Gurjin, Deet gains a Podling Hup, and Brea gains a Sci-Fi ally. And we can talk about those. I think if we go through them each one at a time, we can explore those. But yes, you're right. Mm-hmm. So they gain an ally, and they respond to that call for adventure. So in the hero's journey, the refusal of the call can manifest in a couple of different ways. One is that the character, like the classic 1982 film of The Dark Crystal Gem, the character can actually refuse the call, right? Like Frodo saying, I can't carry this ring to Mordor, there's no way. They have that classic refusal. We only see that happen really with Deet in episode 1, where she says to her grandmother, I don't think I can do this, and her grandmother says, you're the only one who can. Mm-hmm. The other two have a different response to the decision about whether or not to take up the call. Rian doesn't really reject it at all. Rather than that, it's more like he's compelled to morally uptake the adventure. And then with Brea, we actually see there being situational obstacles preventing her from taking up the call to adventure. But I won't go too far down that. Let's actually talk about Rian's story first. So, as you mentioned, right, Rian's in this situation where he feels that, Mira deserves justice, rightfully so. He's seen a horrible atrocity befall his loved one. Gurjin finds him in the castle, and Rian convinces him to dream fast with him to show him the truth, right? Mm. And Gurjin's got this moment where he says, "I go where you go," and then Rian says, "All right, together then." And I love that line. It's the same line that Jen uses when he agrees to team up with Kira in the original movie.
Right.
And they have this allyship, and it's a beautiful relationship between them, isn't it?
Yeah, we get a beautiful example of positive masculinity here. They hug each other, they cry together, and they grieve for Mira. Gurjin says to Rian, "She loved you," and Rian says to Gurjin, "She loved you too." And I just really love that moment. I really love seeing men show love for each other, and it's not perceived in a negative, toxic way.
Totally. Yeah, it gave me goosebumps.
Yeah, it's lovely. They have a really good relationship. They're very good friends. And Gurjin is a really great faithful friend archetype for our hero here.
Yes, so allies have a really important job in the hero's journey. Classic Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings, right? Hero's going to have a lot of challenges, and they're going to be too great to face alone. They need someone to do things like distract the guards, carry their gear, help encourage them when times get tough, and the journey would be, frankly, dull without them, right? So Gurjin fills that role for Rian in the story.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sworn to carry your burdens.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Poor Gurjin / Lydia.
Carry my gear. Okay.
Carry my gear. Rian, though, he decides as part of this, and we chatted a little bit about this earlier, it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Rian decides he needs to get proof of the Skeksis' crimes to Madra Thra. It's the Madra in Stone in the Wood, because no one will believe him without dream fasting with him, and if he dies, the truth dies with him. So Rian and Gurjin decide to go and get proof, right? Which is incredibly selfless.
Yeah. It's extremely dangerous, but Rian, he knows the risks. He knows what has to be done. He has to get the truth out there because the Skeksis will continue to drain Gelfling and kill his people. Now, also, Rian knows his place in the world, which is really interesting to talk about because we think he's the everyman archetype, and the everyman archetype usually knows their place in the world. They know they're not higher or lesser. They know what they need to do to continue in their quest. And the fact that Rian knows that not everyone might believe him, and they're going to go get the essence, is just another way to show that he's in the everyman archetype.
Totally, yeah. So he's just a regular castle guard who's been thrust into extraordinary circumstances by virtue of having witnessed something he shouldn't have. And now he's got to decide what to do with it. And he could run, he could turn himself in, he could hide, but he does the selfless thing. And that is quintessential everyman archetype.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they do that, right? They go in and they escape into the castle. They go deeper into the Skeksis' territory. They see the crystal and that the crystal is corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And Rian is actually able to explain to Gurjin what that means. So here we have a connection between the Skeksis' activities in using the crystal to drain life and the corruption of Thra itself happening there, although the Gelflings themselves have yet to really make that connection. And then the pair go and hide in the laboratory where they're going to steal the essence, but are detected by the scientist. They're interrupted by the Chamberlain, who comes in also intending to steal the essence. And they are then interrupted by the scientist. So Chamberlain, classic Chamberlain, tries to lie his way out of that situation, but is unable to convince the scientist of his innocence, and they fight. They fight, and the essence that is in Chamberlain's hand gets dropped. Rian grabs it, and they run. And I love this. The scientist cries, "They're absconding with the essence!" But they get captured.
There's never a bad time to use big words.
You know what? I love that. I'm going to take that into my heart. When I was a kid, people used to make fun of me. They'd say, "Why do you say intelligent? Why don't you just say smart?" I remember this when I was in grade 4, and I looked at the person who said that to me, and I was like, well, because they don't mean the same thing. So thank you for that. That's lovely. So it's interesting. I love this capture scene because the Chamberlain grabs Gurjin, tries to convince Rian that he's their friend and that turning back the essence is going to be in their best interest, which points to Chamberlain as a different kind of character archetype, which we'll talk about in a bit. But despite that, Gurjin sacrifices himself, stabs the Chamberlain, and then Rian jumps out of the castle window, falling into the river below and swimming to safety. So you really see Rian's heroic journey as being a very sort of physical one, wrought with escape and confrontation and conflict. But it's really kind of true to his character type as an everyman to be going through these kinds of trials. We'll talk a little bit more about his heroic journey in a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had wanted to say about his arc. Is there anything else that kind of stood out to you?
Well, the fact that Rian is so active, like physically active, it is a little tropey. Like, quite often in art and media and literature, males are very physically active and females are passive. But
that's true.
You know, it does definitely make for some really good drama and action for a TV show, so I'm not really going to complain about it.
Yeah, and I do think that, like, when we talk about how the three of these Gelfling kind of work together, even though it is kind of tropey to give those abilities to Rian as the only male in the group, it does make sense with the kind of unity that they try to create between the three, that we would have an active character.
Right. So do you want to talk about our three heroes, Rian, Deet, and Brea, and another symbol that you recently looked up?
I do, but I'm going to wait till we get to the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I do. Let's talk about Deet.
I would love to
Deet's
talk
already
about
had her moment. Yeah, right? I could talk about Deet all day.
She's so cute.
She is so cute. She's already had her moment of refusal, right? So she's already had her call to adventure. She's had her moment of refusal, and she has crossed the threshold into another world by leaving the Groton caves. And we see her now anew in daylight with her eyes covered.
Yeah. So I want to put a pin in the fact that she's wearing a blindfold. I'd like to come back to it after we talk about the peeper beetle.
Ooh, okay. So everybody pay attention to the fact that Deet starts in the overlands with a blindfold. And yeah, we'll come back to that. So Deet's out there. She's exploring the world of Thra, and she gets this really immersive nature experience, and you see her interacting with the plants, and you see her interacting with the animals, and I love she's got this scene where she runs into what is probably the series' most iconic and aggressively grumpy animal, the Fizzgig, and she immediately befriends it.
Yeah.
Right? Giving a lot of insight into the power of heart that defines Deet's heroism.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, you know, she's up here and she's alone, and she doesn't really know how to get to Harar or whether she's even going the right way, although she thinks she is. But she's feeling kind of lonely and a little bit lost and just out of place, stranger in a strange land. So she ends up... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, do you think she needs a friend?
I think Deet is not herself without community, and she really does need a friend. You know, she goes out of her way to try and befriend literally everyone she comes across, because being close to people is really important to her as a Groton.
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah, so she falls asleep and she runs into, as she's sleeping, we meet the same Arkham that Rion encountered. The one that he tried to hunt has fled the castle. This Arkham is now running through the forest, trying to escape, get back to its hive, presumably, and it encounters Deet, asleep. And so it's kind of above her and hovering over her, and it's got this sort of classic monstrous experience. You think that it's going to, like, eat her or something. But she wakes and looks at it, and, like, it looks surprised, for one, and then she tries to talk to it, and it attacks her. Why do you think it attacked her?
Do you think it attacked, or do you think it screamed in her face because it needed to tell her something?
I don't know. Yeah, I feel like it's portrayed initially like it's attacking her. But if you watch it and in retrospect and understanding this arachnid species, we learned that, you know, they're quite intelligent. And for me, my thoughts are that, you know, it's on the run, it's hungry, it's scared, it can't find its people. It is being hunted by Gelfling. It finds another Gelfling in the woods, and it's defending itself, is how I like to think about it. But yeah, maybe it's also trying to talk to her. What would it want to say if it was?
So this scene is filmed from Deet's point of view, and from her point of view, I don't think she's ever seen an Aratham before because they were driven from Grot a long time ago, and she doesn't even know about their history. So I feel like, you know, it looks like a giant spider. I think that she would initially be afraid, but she does try to befriend it because she's Deet. But because it's told from her perspective, we don't really understand why the Aratham is attacking her. But if you put yourself in the Aratham's position, it escapes from the from the scientist laboratory in the castle. It then gets hunted by Gelfling through the castle. It escapes and now is running through the woods, not with its family. We learn later the Aratham are very closely connected to each other, like Deet and her family.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So we have a meeting here of two very lost and scared creatures, but when they meet, there's a serious communication problem, and I think they both completely misinterpret each other, and then it all comes to a head, literally, when Deet throws Hup at it to scare it away.
Yes, totally. Oh, man, okay. Let's talk about Hup.
Mm-hmm.
So, wow, I mean, I have so many things to say about Hup. How would you introduce him?
He is, Hup is he's like a hobbit. He reminds me of Pippin and Merry from Lord of the Rings. He's very genial, welcoming. He also wants to be your friend. And as soon as he perceives Deet to be in danger, he immediately launches into action to try to save her. Now, yes. It kind of doesn't quite go how he would have liked it to, maybe a little bit on the embarrassing side, but in the end they win.
That's right, yeah. So actually, that's a really good segue into this archetype that Hup fills. So Hup is absolutely an ally. He's a friend to Deet, and he is the ally that joins with Deet in this episode. But Hup also occupies a really important role as a trickster character, sort of like Dobby from Harry Potter, right? So the trickster is a really important archetype. And this archetype goes back, I mean, the hero's journey is an ancient monomyth, but you can see great examples of the trickster character in Shakespeare. So Shakespeare uses the fool in a literary sense that the Dark Crystal uses the trickster, Hup. So in Shakespeare's plays, comedies and tragedies, there's usually a capital F fool and a lowercase fool. So the fool as a buffoon, or the fool as in the agent of perspective. Right, so the fool is a source of comedic relief, and so we see that a lot with Hup. Like, he wants to be a hero too. Like, we've got our three heroes, Hup's going to be a hero too, but his heroism efforts are not met with the same sorts of success that our three Gelfling heroes are. He tends to be kind of bumbling and doddering and slapstick about it, but his experience of trying to be a hero provides a lot of reflection about what it means to be a hero, and also just sort of as a proxy for the viewer of understanding heroism and the journey that these gelflings are on. Hup provides that perspective. He's so important for that. He's sort of a foil for the heroes themselves in that way, and he provides a bit of insight onto their efforts and their outcomes. And we'll explore that more as his character develops.
Yeah, like we were talking about how we think that Hup is, in some scenes, Hup is the viewer, and his perception is he sees our heroes how the viewer sees them, which leads some really beautiful and insightful moments throughout the show.
Yes, exactly, and it's specifically because of his slightly comedic perspective that we're able to gain that. Yeah, so we'll really look forward to exploring that more with him, but he's such a great character.
Yeah, we really love Hup.
Yeah, we do. So Deeth's journey is really different from Rian's in the sense that her quest is really one of spiritual virtue, or the capacity of the soul. Like, Deeth's focus is the impetus that drives all living beings, right? The word of the darkening. She needs to spread that. It's really about the corruption of the spirit of the planet that she's working on, as opposed to the stopping of conflict like Rian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And last but certainly not least is Brea's arc. So in Brea's arc, she returns to the library, which is now in chaos, and the librarian is in there lamenting that it's all his fault because she is only a young girl. One of many situations where Brea's abilities are being underestimated because she's the youngest daughter, or because she is just a girl, or because she's a princess. She's constantly being underestimated by the people around her. But in his lamenting, he cues Brea to this other clan of Gelfling called the Sci-Fi, who are great adventurers with deep knowledge of signs and symbols. You can see the librarian's clan superiority kind of come out here as he speaks about the Sci-Fi with this obvious condescension and disdain. But he then agrees to help Brea go and talk to them. She says to him, I love this line, "I don't need your terrible apology. I need answers."
Yeah. Which shows that she's still really fixed on trying to find the answer to what this symbol means. I would also like to say that when we were talking about Odin willing to sacrifice anything for forbidden knowledge, there's a parallel here with Brea willing to do anything for the forbidden knowledge everyone keeps telling her she shouldn't be into.
Yes,
and
totally. Except the key. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, she doesn't willingly sacrifice anything, though. It's all taken from her. But we don't necessarily have to make a direct reference to Odin One-Eye here. It can just be that she sacrifices her entire life in order to find out what this knowledge is.
Yes, and I think that actually points, although there are definitely parallels there, with Ogra, the hidden knowledge is really about the cosmic knowledge of the universe, whereas what Brea's looking for is actually the truth of reality. They're similar but very, very different. And the fact that Brea doesn't sacrifice and has so much taken from her, I think really kind of points to her as this anti-hero archetype, right? Mm-hmm. Where she's not always making the best decisions, but she's doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And so Brea's trying to understand this symbol. And so we've talked a little bit about Deet, and we've talked a little bit about Rian. There's 3 Gelflings, and there's 3 triangles, or 3 sections. We've got 3 circles within a triangle. And this, actually, I was thinking about this earlier, this really reminds me of another iconic shape from Japanese cultural history made famous by the Legend of Zelda games, the Triforce, which is also 3 shapes, 3 triangles within a triangle. And I think if we spend a little bit of time talking about what the Triforce means, it actually sheds a lot of light onto the roles that Rian, Brea, and Deet fill in the Dark Crystal universe. So in the Triforce, the red triangle here represents power, the force that makes all things possible. Rian's heroic journey, being one of physical virtue and the capacity of the body, solidly places him as sort of the red quadrant, or the red corner of this triangle. Whereas Deet given that she has this focus on spiritual growth and on sort of making a choice to choose love over fear, represents courage. So her spiritual arc is synonymous with this green triangle here, or the courage corner of the Triforce. And then finally, Brea, with her relentless pursuit of the truth, represents the wisdom corner, right? So she's looking to understand truth above all else. So we've got these three different quests, these three different Gelfling, filling these three different sections of the Triforce. And the meaning of the Triforce, the historical meaning of this shape, is the three that are one. So when we think about the three that are one in the context of this shape here, it's quite a powerful message, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely means get your stuff together and unify.
Yes, and unify, and in the sense of bringing these three very different aspects of the psyche, the id, the ego, and the superego, power, wisdom, and courage, bringing these three aspects into alignment and into balance as a way to solve the problems of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really great metonymy of that symbol and the meaning of that symbol.
That's right, yeah. Now, when Brea, so the librarian agrees to take Brea to see the Sifa clan. And there's this wonderful moment where Kadia and the librarian have a dialogue exchange, and you get the feeling that there's a lot of history between the two of them. Do you have any speculation on what that is?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is such a great scene for a number of reasons. There's a lot to unpack here, right? So we've got Elder Kadir and Sifa Annika, who is his apprentice. They work together. Sifa Annika is voiced by the talented Natalie Dormer, who played Marjorie Tyrell in Game of Thrones. And Kadir is actually voiced by Eddie Izzard.
Yeah.
So there's some great voice acting happening there, but they're in this room together. And I mean, first of all, we've already heard that the library is a little bit hesitant about the Sifa and has a bunch of prejudices about them. We don't know why. And then we get into this situation, and Elder Kadir's like, "Oh, hey, Brea, I haven't seen you since you were super small. The last time your mom came to see me, and that was a long time ago. But a Sifa does not forget or forgive." And then he looks pointedly at the librarian,
Who
and
then
asks
leaves.
him to leave.
Yeah. And he makes a hasty retreat.
That's a good way to put it.
There's some bad blood between the librarian and Elder Kadir.
Yes, and I think that does. So the question is whether or not that bad blood plays into what happens next with Brea. So there's a scene here where, how did you phrase it? He tells Brea 3 lies and a truth.
No, he tells Brea 2 truths and a lie, which
you.
is a drinking game. It's a drinking game that people play today.
So what are the truths and what is the lie?
Right. So Kadir, he tells Brea that the symbol you're looking for, the knowledge of it can be found in the dream space, which is true. We see that happen later. He also tells her what the dream space is. It's another realm. It's not this world. It's another realm you can go to when you dream fast, which is true. But then he tells her, in order to get there, you must drink this brew with me. And he tells Annika, his apprentice, to fetch the null root.
That's right, but Brea perceives that she's being tricked because she knows what null root is. So she outsmarts the elder by distracting him and switching the glasses. Mm-hmm. And so he drinks the null root instead and loses his memories. And so this is where the question part comes in, because he doesn't just lose the memory of the moment. He has lost his entire memory. So either that null root affected him disproportionately, maybe he has an intolerance or something, or he was planning on seriously doping Brea to the point of her becoming non-functional. And if that's the case, his rationale was that he thought that symbol meant death, so he wanted Brea to forget it entirely. But I don't know if that's all it is. partially wonder if it may have been revenge back at a slight from her mother quite some time ago.
Maybe. I feel like there's some great history we need to look into. Maybe get some books. I don't know. So this scene where Brea outwits him, this is one of my top favorite scenes in the whole show. And I love the moment where she gives him the side eye and she says, "You're lying."
Yes, it's so good.
And
But
I do want to talk about if we were to speculate for a moment on Brea's future after she drank the null root, she's incapacitated. Like, we see what happens to Elder Kadia. He can no longer be the elder anymore, and it's like indefinitely, he's indefinitely broken.
yes,
And
absolutely. And I think that, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm picturing the three sisters' relationship. If that were to happen to Brea, how would Celadon and Thra and Brea relate together after that? And I'm actually thinking of a very sad case where they both share care for her because she just can't function anymore.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think that this moment really sort of solidifies Brea in my mind as an anti-hero because she doesn't show a ton of remorse. I mean, to be fair, he did try to do it to her, but she didn't know what the extent was going to be. And once it happened to Kadir, she didn't show a ton of remorse, and neither did Annika. Annika kind of has this attitude of like, yeah, he totally got what's coming to him, right? So she's doing the wrong things for the right reasons.
He physically attacked Brea. When she said, "I switched our drinks," he physically grabs her and starts shaking her, saying, "I'll make you forget." That's a threat of physical violence.
Scary.
Yeah, that is frightening. That's a threat of physical violence. And that's when Annika picks up the jar and hits him over the head with it to knock him out so that Brea can get out of there.
Yeah, totally. Although he's already under the influence at that point, it definitely doesn't excuse the fact of a physical attack, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting, right? Annika, of course, does what she does because she sees something very different in that symbol. So, where Kadir sees death, Annika sees life, right? And she has this great line here where she says, ending, beginning, death, life, it's all the same circle. Again, pointing back to the original episode title, begin, end, all the same.
Yeah.
Right? So Annika sees that Thra is dying in nature. She talks about where she sees these examples, and then chooses to ally herself with Brea. So she becomes Brea's ally. And I think this is a really important scene. She bids Brea to return to her with her mother's brightest jewel when the last sister kisses the horizon. And you mentioned this before, Bea, about how the Gelflings see the suns as sisters. So we've got these three sister suns and these three Gelfling sisters.
Yeah, exactly. There's also when Brea enters the tent, the elder assumes she wants a vanity potion. Like, do you want a potion to make a man notice you?
Yes.
Or one that'll make your hair shiny? And
Yes,
having
another underestimation.
Well, not just an estimation, but royals having their hair associated with shiny gold is a sun symbol. So there again, the show is making oh God, I can't talk anymore.
A direct reference.
Yeah, a direct reference to Brea having a shiny head. But then in the next episode, someone talks about Brea's hair being shiny again, so it happens more than once. And having a shiny crown, having a golden crown, it's usually a royal solar symbol. So that's just
totally. So the three suns.
It's my theory. Just another point for my theory.
Yeah. Oh man, I can't wait to explore this more. We're gonna do a lot more of a deeper dive into Brea and her sisters, but I did want to mention one thing, actually, speaking of Brea and her sisters, before we move on from Annika. In the books, Annika and Thra, Brea's middle sister, are an item. They're a couple. They are a canon queer relationship that is not shown on the show at all. Mm-hmm. So
which
that,
is
to me, is a really... Right? It's a lost opportunity, for sure.
It's a lost... It's disappointing. They could have had a moment. What if, instead of the librarian bringing Brea to Kadir, Tavra brought Brea to Kadir and bumped into her old
Right?
flame.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Swoon.
Yeah, so this is,
Oh.
again, how it would have been better if there had been more women in the writing room when the show was being written.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a really great example. Like the fact that something so momentous for those characters was just completely skipped is,
Yeah.
it shows, right? It shows.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in the end, Brea does return, and she gets sentenced by her mother to the Order of Lesser Service as a punishment. Her mother decrees even a princess is not above the law, and that's legitimate, right? So Brea's status as an anti-hero is now established. She's stolen a necklace. She's broken the rules. She's ignored her mom a bunch. She's drugged a guy.
Yeah.
You know, all for the relentless pursuit of the truth. And
That's
so
right.
now, so Brea has never refused the call to adventure. She has always been about adventure, but she keeps having these obstacles being put in her path, right? Her status as a royal being a really big one. And so we get this great scene here where Tavra leaves and tells her sister to be brave, and Celadon is thrilled at seeing her receiving justice. Yeah.
Yeah, so this this punishment that Brea is sentenced to, I really love that this episode has two characters being courtly punished, like sentenced with a punishing. And when we talk about the Skeksis, we're gonna talk about the differences.
About punishment.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about the differences and what it says about each culture.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's move into that. I'm too excited.
Yeah.
So we've got our heroes going through their various journeys. Meanwhile, the villains are machinating against them. So right now, the Skeksis are all riled up, looking for Rian and trying to plan their next steps about how they're going to deal with the fallout of the fact that they have murdered a Gelfling and another one who has seen them has gone missing. And there's this great conflict between the Chamberlain and the General. And they both have very different opinions on how the problem should be handled, with the General wanting to use violence to silence dissidents, and the Chamberlain advocating for hegemony. Chamberlain wants to control the narrative in order to control the story about what has happened, leveraging existing cultural beliefs about the Skeksis and about the Gelfling themselves in order to let the story do the work for them. The soft touch. And actually, I'm just going to play a quick clip where he talks about this.
The Gelfling will never believe one of them killed their own.
Of course we believe. Gelfling have always believed Chamberlain's whispers, yes? This is what I do. I plant stories in ground, which grow into truth. Keep Gelfling looking over shoulder, and they won't ever see what's right in front of them.
Right? Keep Gelfling looking over their shoulders, and they will never see what's right in front of them, right? So we talked about this a lot in the first episode, this use of hegemony and cultural conditioning to manufacture consent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just goes to point out how Chamberlain does not want an all-out war. He knows that the general's tactics will lead to all-out war. Chamberlain doesn't want it because he knows that the more Gelfling are alive, the more they can drain and the more essence they can consume. Whereas if they just start killing them all in a war, there won't be as much essence.
That's right. He's playing the long game.
Mm-hmm.
And the very, very selfish game.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so his plan is to control the Gelfling by controlling the narrative to frame Rian for a crime he did not commit, using their own godhood status to remain infallible. I think it's interesting. There's a scene there too where the Emperor is feeling stressed out about all this decision making, and the Chamberlain bids the servant podlings to play music, and the music they play is discordant and noisy and generally awful.
It is. It sounds like, to be honest, it sounds like the industrial machine ever moving forward to me. And constantly consuming goods and nothing is left alive behind it.
That's chilling and so on point.
Because that's what the
and
Skeksis are doing.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the poor scientist is locked up to work on fixing his machines. He locks up his essence and is working around the lab, and he's got this other great line, which I love, which is, "Genius should not be locked up."
Yeah. The scientist is the most picked on Skeksis. Like, he's the one that
So
is
much.
Yeah, he gets picked on the most by all of them. But you know what?
It's the very short end of the stick.
Yeah, and there's a pecking order. Like, I'm going to make the analogy because they're kind of bird-like, and there is a pecking order. And amongst populations of parrots, the weakest parrot gets picked on the most. And you'll be able to tell them out because they'll be on the lowest branch, and they'll be the most messed up looking one of the flock.
So the scientist is the unloved parrot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's in this situation, right? And so the scientist is out trying to fix his machines, and in the meantime, Gurjin and Rian are coming down to steal the essence as proof, and the Chamberlain is also down there trying to steal the essence for himself because he's a super self-serving jerk. And the scientist puts this lockworm, this really cool creature of Thra, on the gate to lock up the essence.
Lock snake.
And lock snake, thank you, not lockworm, lock snake. And the Chamberlain just eats it.
Yeah.
He just walks in and eats it.
And it's
oh,
just
man.
Says a little bit about how the scientist, I don't think he realizes who his Skeksis peers really are. And I think that's why maybe he keeps getting the short stick, and why he keeps getting, he's clearly the most useful one of them. But I think, and we talk about how there's nothing redeemable about the Skeksis, but I do wonder if the scientist has a little bit of compassion and innocence about him,
Yeah.
but he's been downtrodden so much, he's just been, and the constant bullying has just twisted him to the point.
Yeah, like, I think you do make a point there. Like, he does care about living things, like he keeps animals and uses them and things like that, but at a certain point it's become perverted and corrupted. Like, they've become tools more than living things, and he stops seeing the life in them, which I think is his major failing. But yeah, so he's put this lock snake on this grate. The Chamberlain eats it, and it's interesting because the scientist comes back in and says, like, "What are you doing here?" And the Chamberlain's like, "Oh, well, actually, I'm just checking on you because the Emperor told me to, so how's it going?" And the scientist is a little bit skeptical, but he's not going to, toy with an order from the Emperor or question that. So he starts to accept it, and then they both smell Gelfling, and they start looking around for Rian and Gurjin, who are hiding under a table, practically peeing themselves. And then the scientist notices that the essence is gone, and now he calls Chamberlain's bluff. And they start to fight about it, and Chamberlain continues to try and lie about it, but the scientist says, "I can see the lock snake in your teeth." Mm-hmm. So, like, the physical act of the proof of his crime, and it's this great kind of foreshadowing, I think, for Chamberlain's character, because at the end of the day, no matter how you spin the story, the truth is the truth.
Yeah, and it might be more visible than he thinks.
Totally.
Now...
So... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, the fight between the scientist and the Chamberlain gets physical. The Chamberlain drops the essence, and that's when Rian and Gurjin make a break for it. Rian escapes with the essence, and Gurjin is captured and imprisoned back in the scientist's laboratory. However, back in the throne room, the scientist tries to convince the Skeksis what the Chamberlain did, that it's all his fault Rian escaped. But the Chamberlain, and this was really manipulative of him, he twists the truth to make it the scientist's fault. How How did the Chamberlain twist the truth like that?
That, oh man, so it's really, I mean, it's a testament to the Chamberlain's cunning. The scientist accuses the Chamberlain of letting the Gelfling go and trying to steal the essence. And so Chamberlain takes that and he says, yeah, it was my fault. Like, I am so sorry. You should punish me. You should shame me. If I had only arrived at the lab sooner, I could have stopped the scientist from betraying us. And so he takes this narrative and he willfully omits the parts that are relevant about him, like the fact that he was there taking the essence, right? And makes it all about the scientist failing to capture the Gelfling. And the Skeksis, of course, honestly, I feel like the Skeksis don't really care whose fault it is as long as somebody gets hurt.
Yeah.
So there's this great scene where, and I mean, this is the first episode where we really also start to hear the Chamberlain's iconic plaintive, the please, where there's, like, it's meant to sound friendly, but there's nothing friendly about it. We hear that here, and you really start to see, like, what a malicious character he is. And he really, in the hero's journey archetype, he is a villain, but he's also a shapeshifter. And a shapeshifter has a really, really important role in the sense that they often, like, they begin as an ally, in this case an ally to the Skeksis, but they betray their allyship at a critical moment. Their loyalty is frequently in question. It wavers back and forth. They often create this sense of appeal and danger. Like the Chamberlain is obviously one of the most psychologically interesting characters because of this. But like the thing is that we never really know quite where he's at, other than that he's ultimately trying to serve himself in his own pursuit for power, and he's willing to do anything to get it. And as a result, the poor scientist is, and I mean, it's hard to have sympathy for them, but I do. He's punished unfairly.
That's right. And
right?
This, I believe, is a part of, it's like a twist in the knife that's already in your gut. It just makes the scientist even worse after this.
Yes.
Now, the other Skeksi, like you said before, you think that they just want to see a punishment. They just want to see someone get hurt because they revel in it, and they don't really care who. They mention a few other corporeal punishments. Dangle the tail is one, and strap him to the needle is another one. But it's Chamberlain who says, I think he should be visited by the peeper beetle. So
Yes.
the Chamberlain he's a trickster, he's a shapeshifter. Going back to what we were talking about with Norse mythology, I believe the Chamberlain is a great analogy or allegory for Loki, the trickster. Loki plagued Thor and Odin and giants. All throughout Norse mythology, Loki would trick them into doing things they didn't want to do. And Chamberlain suggesting the peeper beetle for the scientist, and the scientist's eye being removed against his will is a great but a great inverse of Thor sacrificing an eye for enlightenment.
You mean Odin?
Sorry, Odin. Yes, Odin sacrificing an eye for enlightenment.
Yeah, totally. So whereas Ogra may or may not have given her eye as part of her transition into a divine being, the scientist has given his eye unwillingly as a punishment for his own pursuit of knowledge. So it is a really interesting inversion of that parallel, isn't it?
It's not given, though. It's taken from him. And
that's true. It's taken.
He doesn't gain knowledge afterwards. He doesn't gain enlightenment. He doesn't gain ancestral wisdom. If he did, he may...
becomes worse.
Yeah, if he did, he may have become like the heretic who we meet later and deny Skeksi way of life and leave. But he just gets even deeper into it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that punishment scene in just a minute. But before we do, I just want to touch on, there's a moment now. So the Emperor has agreed to use Chamberlain's way of using the Gelfling against themselves. And we get this really sad scene towards the end of the episode where Rian's dad comes in, intending to plead for his son's life. He comes in trying to state that, my son is mentally ill. There's no way he could have killed someone. And if you could just, benevolent Skeksis, find it in your hearts to have leniency and heal him, I'm sure that everything would be okay. And so the Emperor uses Rian's father's love for his son against him, and they basically say to him, yeah, go out into the world, go and bring your son back and the item that he stole, and we will heal him. We will be lenient with him. So they use his love for Rian against him to manipulate him into doing their own dirty work, even lying about Gurjin's confession to explain Gurjin's own disappearance, and really just making a point to craft that narrative to get Rian to Rian's father to consent, manufacturing his consent to do something abominable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is really a really awful thing to do.
Yeah, so anyways, just a segue there, but yeah, so this peeper beetle attack, this is a really grotesque scene. Before I play it, though, I just want to touch on a couple of things. I've got a clip I want to show, but yeah, so we've got this beetle coming in through a cage to take the scientist's eye. This, to me, is a direct parallel to the Room 101 in 1984. George Orwell's 1984, a book that was written, I think, in the 50s, about a dystopian, totalitarian, fascist society where all culture, literature, education, religion, art are so completely governed by the ruling elite that it is impossible to escape it. So there's a protagonist who realizes that his society is a lie. He is eventually captured by the government and subjected to another form of face torture, where they put these rats in a cage and aim them at his eyes, with the threat of taking them out. Now, in 1984, this doesn't actually happen. The character breaks. The character breaks, and he rats out, I guess no pun intended, rats out his lover. And then in doing so, he accepts his own brainwashing back into the world. He has intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually killed himself. So the government didn't actually need to execute the torture. But this imagery, this parallel imagery, I think really points to the Skeksis as this dystopian fascist society. So check out this clip here, as they sort of reinforce their own corporeal punishment.
When we fail ourselves,
We must be punished.
when we fail each other,
We must be punished.
when we fail our emperor,
We must be punished.
So yeah, right there at the end, we see the scientist crying for mercy. He does not get it. In a cruel irony, Chamberlain, the one who manipulated him into that situation such that he was punished for a crime and a wrong he did not commit, also gets to choose his mode of punishment. It says a lot about this society, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that going back to Brea's punishment, Brea is punished by being forced to serve, whereas the scientist is physically punished with bodily harm.
Torture, even.
Torture, yeah, a torturous punishment. And it's public. It's public for the Skeksis to watch. And it's a supreme humiliation. And it's meant to weaken him. Now, but with Brea's punishment, it's a way of getting rid of her. It's Gelfling who are sentenced to the Order of Lesser Service. It's a way of just making them go away. And you could parallel it to women being sent to nunneries back in the day. Just because they were troublesome, they asked too many questions, they weren't, they were a bit too free, They may have been sexually free, and so they were ordered either by the family or their community to go to a nunnery, which was basically a way of silencing them.
I gotta say this, I'm sorry. Get thee to a nunnery.
Indeed.
But yeah, so there, we do have two very different but very devastating punishment scenes in this episode, right? In Brea's case, it is her obstacle preventing her from going on her adventure. In the scientist's case, it is the Orwellian indoctrination of him as the lowest parrot on the branch.
Yeah, and that, I forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what else can we say here? I mean all of this kind of treatment really, I think, points to the world that the Skeksis have built as being an Orwellian dystopian world.
Yeah.
Right? Where like the Gelflings' entire understanding of their reality is dictated to them by the stories and the narratives and the cultural myths that people like Chamberlain tell. And we see that the people like Chamberlain who are in power are themselves incredibly brutalist, totalitarian, and fascist towards each other and towards their subjugates. I loved your earlier reference to sort of the industrial machine there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the music. Industrialization and mass consumption often go with a totalitarian fascist regime. So it just seemed to fit. Yeah. So remember when we wanted to talk about Deet having a blindfold when we first see her on the surface world. So there's a lot of parallel symbolism in this show, in this episode too, specifically with having to do with perception and seeing and having the wool over your eyes, but then peeling it off. In stages, Deet slowly takes the blindfold off. She has it on, then it comes off when she sleeps and meets Hup, and then she puts it back on because she thinks the suns might still hurt her, but then at the end of the episode it's off again. So she goes through this transition of wearing the blindfold and taking it off, and I feel like that's a really good, kind of a really good symbol for people who have seen part of the truth, and they're going back and forth between denying it and then being willing to see it.
And how it has to be sort of a transitionary process because it's too bright. It's almost like an allegory for Plato's The Cave at that point. Like it's too bright to see.
Yeah.
And you have to learn how to look at it.
And at the end of that episode, Deet talks about the suns being so bright and so close. What if one of them fell out of the sky? And so that's an allusion to the three sisters and one sister becoming dark or going away or disappearing.
Whoa, yeah. Foreshadowing Thra, creepy.
Well, not just foreshadowing Thra, but also foreshadowing Celadon going dark, you could say.
Oh yeah, you could read that either way, but there's a loss of a sister for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I feel like we should wrap this up since we're already over. Indeed. What do you think?
Yeah, sure.
Do we have more to say, or should we toast it?
We can toast it.
All right. Well, here at Amanda Toast, we celebrate what makes this amazing show so groundbreakingly great, and we talk about areas that could have been improved, done differently, but always with the spirit of celebrating the series. Our goal is to relive the magic of this gorgeous, thought-provoking work while we wait for a renewal for Season 2. It is my deepest, deepest hope that we will, learn a little bit more about Thra and Annika in Season 2. I don't know if that would happen or not, but it'd be great if it did. So who should we toast to?
I would like to toast to the poor lock snake dying in the act of fulfilling his utmost duty.
Oh, to the lock snake. And I would like to toast to Tavronica, the queer ship that should have sailed but didn't.
Indeed, toast.
Toast.
Thank you to our viewers, and we would like to let you all know that this show goes up on YouTube under our channel, Amanda Toast.
That's right.
And did we have a little shout out we wanted to give today?
Oh, yeah, we totally did. So we wanted to do a shout out to Conjunction Cosplay. So they recently posted a super true to form Chamberlain puppet with their daughter and puppeteer Lydia. They did an amazing job, so we'll post a link to them in our description when we post the video, and we'll also post it here in our Twitch chat. Check them out. They're just the best. So big shout out to them. And then, yeah, I guess
Yeah.
also just shout out to the Dark Crystal itself, right?
That's right. The season 2 of the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance has not yet been confirmed or renewed. So if you love this series as much as we do, like, subscribe, and share our podcast, and let's make it clear that we still hear the song of Thra in our hearts.
See you next time.
Bye!